All right, listen, today we're going in a slightly different direction from weeks past. And in the past 5 messages that I've shared with you have been on the topic of healthy church, being a healthy church, and maybe discovering that we are a healthy church. Last Sunday was the last formal installment of that series. And over those 5 messages, I had expounded upon the condition of the church in America, really kind of a sad condition of many churches are in right now. Just misguided. There's some deficiencies in a lot of churches, a lot of being self-led, a lot of misguidedness in churches today, such as a lot of churches are reaching out and they're pursuing Christians instead of reaching out and pursuing the lost. And they're doing it just for the sake of numbers. They want to build themselves up. And in the process, what's happened, as I've shared with you, I think there's been a lot of compromise. The standards have been compromised concerning things like personal holiness. And I shared this with you in order to create a contrast of what's out there versus what we are doing. And I really believe that we, Praise Assembly, all of us, are doing our best at striving to continue to be a healthy church. A place where believers can grow and mature and hopefully reproduce. And as a local church, we're doing a pretty good job in all those areas, except one. We really do need to improve, and that's where I left off last week. We need to improve in the area of reproducing. In other words, inviting the lost, either inviting them to Christ or inviting them to church, to this service where they would find Christ. Because basically, we're not doing enough telling. We're not telling people whom we know. We're not doing really what we should be doing in telling people that Jesus Christ is the only way that a person can get into heaven. Without Jesus in their life, hell is their final destination. And we need to improve on telling others. And so as found people, we need to be more actively involved in telling and inviting lost people, telling them how to become found people. And at the same time, there's an extension to that message from last week that I want to begin to address this morning. And in the process, just launch a very brief series, probably just this week and next. And the title's on the cover of today's bulletin. And so we need not only to tell others about salvation through Christ, we need to make sure that we're securing the next generation of those who are already part of our heritage. Okay, so it's about the kids. It's about the kids. And all kids. And again, this is a message that began to brew inside of my heart the same time that the Healthy Church series was there. Because as I was traveling through July and August over to Vietnam and then to Tanzania and to South Africa, what I came away with was this strategy that those national churches have to reach kids. I mean, it's like I thought about everything, everyone I talked to, everything that was said to me, I kept hearing over and over, it's about the kids. It's about the kids. We've got to get that next generation. We've got to secure the next generation. And then we've got to get kids that are not yet inside the church, who are not within the faith, to become part of the faith. And so here's the premise of my message for today, and I'm going to give it to you right from the beginning. Your faith needs to become their faith. Your faith as an adult must become the personal saving faith for your children. And in order for that to happen, we need to be diligent in doing everything that we can so that our children will not stray from the truth that we have found. And in fact, Scripture gives us the proper order of things. And I find this in Paul's second letter to Timothy. You see, when Paul commended Timothy for his faith, in a few verses, he also mentioned the faith which was first found in his grandmother and then in his mother as well. And I want you to listen to this. Paul says in 2 Timothy 1:3, I thank God whom I serve, as my ancestors did, with a clear conscience, as night and day I constantly remember you in my prayers. Recalling your tears, I long to see you, so that I may be filled with joy. I'm reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and in your mother Eunice, and I am persuaded now lives in you also. You see, our faith, our beliefs, our values are meant to be handed over to the generation and the generations that follow us. I mean, what a shame it would be. What a shame it would be, just looking back at my own personal history, to think of how a real and genuine faith in Christ came into my life, and I became born again on August 27th, 1974. A first-generation believer. I was the first one in my family to get saved. I'd never heard the gospel before. It was presented to me very clearly, and I accepted it that night, and Jesus Christ became my Savior. And my whole life's trajectory radically changed that night. And then a few years later, I met a young gal who also had gotten saved even before I did. And together we married, and we had a child and then a family, and we raised them in a Christian household. They know what we believe, and they believe what we believe. But what a shame it would be if that did not all get passed along to the next generation. I mean, folks, I'm thinking about that. All my life growing up, there were attempts periodically by my parents to dump us kids at church. And even the church that we kind of settled on was not a Bible-believing, Bible-preaching, gospel-believing church. It really was little more than a religious social club. And through that, I felt a call to ministry. And I thought maybe I would become a pastor in that denomination. And again, this denomination was extremely liberal. They did not believe in Christ as God or even the Son of God. That denomination, even back in the 70s, was ordaining, practicing homosexuals. I mean, extremely liberal. They believed that everyone goes to heaven, but there's no God. I was a teenage alcoholic. All while being associated with that church. I was living in darkness. I'm telling you, when I found out about the good news of Jesus Christ, I realized just how dark that darkness had been. I mean, all of a sudden, when you first get saved, I mean, the liberation, the lightness, the joy, the peace that floods into you is unbelievable. I mean, I did not grow up in a Christian household. And then to come to Christ and again get married, have a family, and decidedly, our kids are going to know Jesus. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And then to see our kids raising their kids to know that same truth. They don't have to go through all the harshness and all the hardship that we went through growing up. Psalm 71:18 says this. It says, even when I'm old and gray, do not forsake me, O God. Listen, do not forsake me, O God, until I proclaim your power to the next generation. That's our job. That's our job. And then the rest of that verse says, declaring your might to all who are to come. And so far, so good in my family. Again, the grandchildren are being raised to know about Jesus. But who knows about the generation that will follow that? You see, the fact is that we can only be responsible for the generations that are directly under us or behind us. And then the next generation has to do their job. But let me tell you, you must do everything. You must do the right things. And as we had that word in that message in tongues and interpretation, I thought, it talked about no striving and all that. And I thought, that's great. What a powerful word. I mean, no striving. And I think there's a lot of things we waste our time striving in. But I'm going to tell you one thing you must strive for is to make sure the truth you have found is proclaimed to the next generation. That's a responsibility we cannot dodge. It's we've got to do the right things. And we've got to do them over and over and over again for the sake of the next generation. We have to do the right things, the profitable things. We have to do the things that will help our children to know and to love the Lord. And one of the saddest accounts in all the Old Testament, at least in my judgment, has to be from the 2nd chapter of the book of Judges. And Judges chapter 2 gives us a record of what happens when one generation is not serious and fails to be intentional about propagating their faith into the next generation. And it can happen all too easily. I honestly think that it's starting to happen. I think it's starting to impact, not happen, but it's starting to impact Christianity in America. Because I see far too many Christian parents, I'm going to focus on parents just for a minute, but far too many Christians too, who honestly believe, if I'm to judge by their actions, and I believe that actions do speak louder than words, amen? There are far too many Christian parents who believe by their actions that things like organized sports or academic pursuit is more important for their children than spiritual formation. And I got to tell you, that irritates me to no end. When I see parents putting worldly endeavors, worldly pursuits ahead of godly endeavors. It makes no sense to me. It makes no sense to me. You know, you saw one of the clips that was revolving up here. Our job is to make sure our kids get into heaven, not Harvard. No, I mean, it's light and it's funny and it's cute. But do you realize it is true? It's more important that your child and your grandchildren and those after them get into heaven. And don't shut me out on this, okay? Kids should be involved in physical activity. They should be involved in intellectual challenges. I believe that Christians ought to be the cream of the top. They really ought to. We ought to be the best of the best. But not to the exclusion of their spiritual development, their spiritual formation. So let's look at that second chapter of Judges, beginning at verse 6. Judges chapter 2, verse 6. It says, after Joshua had dismissed the Israelites, they went to take possession of the land, each to their own inheritance. The people served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him, and who had seen all the great things the Lord had done for Israel. Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. And they buried him in the land of his inheritance at Timnah-Heres in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gash. After that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. And then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and they served the Baals. They forsook the Lord, the God of their ancestors who had brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshiped various gods of the peoples around them. They aroused the Lord's anger because they forsook him and served Baal and the Ashtoreths. In his anger against Israel, the Lord gave them into the hands of raiders who plundered them. He sold them into the hands of their enemies all around, whom they were no longer able to resist. Whenever Israel went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them, just as he had sworn to them, and they were in great distress. Such a sad account. It's a true tragedy. And again, I want us to look, we read all those verses, but I want us to look at just two verses and look at the contrast between these two. Verses 7 and verse 10. Verse 7 says that the people served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and the elders. And then verse 10 says, after that whole generation, after Joshua had been buried, after that generation of elders that was along with him, after they had been buried, that whole generation, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. Again, I was taken out of darkness by God's grace. Taken out of his horrible darkness. Living really a life that was upside down and didn't make any sense and came into the light, and it's like incredible. Why wouldn't I want to make sure that didn't get passed down to the next generation and the next generation and for generations to come? I want that legacy to be preserved. But after that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done in Israel. Folks, that kind of thing has been happening for millennia. This is not the only time in history when a generation is strayed away from biblical truth and reality. This is just one account. This is one very clear account. And what we just read about here among the Old Testament Israelites happened again, even in the New Testament age. It's happened throughout church history, affecting every revival movement over time, where people just get on fire for God, and then it begins to wane, it begins to cool off, and they begin to drift away, and they begin to worship other things. And it doesn't have to be a pagan God. It doesn't have to be our Christian grandchildren or their children becoming Hindu or Buddhist. It can be the God of athletics. It can be the God of intellect. It can be the God of whatever. There are a lot of false gods out there that people worship. But my concern is that what took place around the turn of the last century, the Pentecostal revival, the Pentecostal movement, I don't want to see that die. I don't want to see it fade away. And I can see how this can happen in some churches and some church denominations, some church groups. Because if you remember one of my earlier complaints from the Healthy Church messages, a lot of churches today don't have Sunday schools where the next generation can be trained. They don't have life groups, age-level life groups where little children can learn the realities of God. Some churches don't even have children's church. They have child care, but it isn't a concerted effort at educating kids in the Word. And as I'd also mentioned, some churches are even putting in those indoor play centers that are investing in invest in some exciting curriculum for kids. Put the thousands of dollars that is, steel tubing and some plastic slides, put it into hiring someone who can spend time educating the children about the things of God. Does that make sense? Again, your kid can play at McDonald's, Playland, Chick-fil-A. I don't mean to be repeating other sermons, but I want to get this through to you. But only the church can provide the reality of Jesus Christ living in a small child's heart. And as I was putting this message together, I was thinking back to our Sunday evening series called Vision. We just had 6 weeks of Vision. It ended a few weeks ago, and we had a great turnout. But I'm telling you what, so many more people should have been there. I taught a 6-week class on sacred parenting. Doesn't the title at least make you curious? Sacred parenting. And in week 2, Gary Thomas, the author of that series, in his concern for the spiritual growth of children, he spoke of how the home should be as sacred as the church. In other words, home should be the primary place for spiritual formation of children, and then the church should reinforce this. But you know what? What if there isn't real spiritual depth in the home? I think what Gary shared was great, but I think it assumes or presumes a little bit here. What if that home doesn't have any real spiritual depth? And what if the local church also doesn't offer anything with any real depth either? You know what? You have Judges chapter 2 all over again. So I see 2 problems working together in concert with each other to the detriment of the next generation of potential believers. And I'm talking about the kids. It's about the kids. It's about the kids. And one of these problems, again, is parents who don't value spiritual growth as much as academic and athletic development. The other is the churches that also don't see the value in providing opportunities where children can develop spiritually. And you know what? That creates the perfect storm. And here's the bottom line for every single one of us and for every single human being in existence right now. The most important thing in life, the most important thing in this life is making sure that you're ready for the next life. That's it. It's not about having a great job. It's not about lots of education and letters after your name. A beautiful home, tons of money, prominence. Those are all nice things. But the most important thing in life, without exception, is knowing that you are going to spend eternity in heaven. And I'll tell you what, I think the church in America has lost sight of that. I think we've been infected by affluenza. Some of you didn't get that. I try, okay? I try. I know it's not going to be a stand-up routine, but affluenza. I didn't say influenza. Affluenza. We got money. We've got money. Since the recession of 2008, Americans have money. We should almost be ashamed at how much money we have. The nation is doing well. The economy is crazy. The stock market Friday hit an all-time record high. I'm almost ready to say, God, let it all collapse. Not that he would listen to me, and I hope he wouldn't, if I pray that way. Because you know what? People would flood into churches again. Just like they did during the Great Depression. Only a couple of you remember those days. Really, you know, the greatest giving and the greatest mission giving in the history of the Assemblies of God was during the Great Depression. Per capita. Because people realized that this life is fragile. That life is forever. And they put their money where their heart was. They put their money where their beliefs were. So affluenza it's affected the non-Christian, but I'm afraid it's affected the Christian as well. Because now we've got this excess fund. I want my kid to really excel academically. I'm gonna pay $1 billion a year tuition to get them in the best schools. And again, I'm not against that, but hey, when it's all said and done, you know, we've had some highly educated demons try to take over the world in the last couple generations. Adolf Hitler didn't quit school in kindergarten. Stalin went to seminary. Hello. I mean, you know, these are highly educated demons. We don't need any more of those. So you can have both, but you don't sacrifice one for the other. Do you get it? And we know this. There's only one thing that you can take into eternity with you after you're gone to heaven. We all know this. You can't bring your cash savings with you. We can't take our vehicles and our homes and our 401ks. The only thing we can bring with us into heaven is other people, other souls, specifically your personal next generation of souls, meaning your children and your children's children. And again, all the good things in life, please, all the good things in life and our eternal destiny, they don't have to be mutually exclusive. You understand what I'm saying? That's not what I'm saying. We need to properly align our priorities. Now, thinking back to the passage from Judges chapter 2, Joshua was mentioned. And the people, as we're told, were faithful in living the right way. They did the right things. They lived the right way. They believed the right way as long as Joshua was leading them. And what I love so much about Joshua was that he always felt free to speak the truth and to challenge the people. And I love how direct he was when he got near to the end of his life. And I want to share with you what he said to the people. Near the end of his life, he openly shared his personal convictions. And I want us to look at this. It's Joshua chapter 24. We're going to read verses 1 through 15. Look at this. And just before I read it, let me tell you that what Joshua says in these verses is technically a history lesson. He gives the people a history lesson, and then it's a renewal of a covenant that they've had with God. But let's take a look at this. Verse 1, Joshua chapter 24. It says, Then Joshua assembled all the tribes of Israel at Shechem. He summoned the elders, leaders, judges, officials of Israel, and they presented themselves before God. And Joshua said to all the people, This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Long ago, your ancestors, including Terah, the father of Abraham and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates River and worshipped other gods. But I took your father Abraham from the land beyond the Euphrates, led him throughout Canaan, and gave him many descendants. I gave him Isaac, and to Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. I assigned the hill country of Seir to Esau, but Jacob and his family went down to Egypt. Then I sent Moses and Aaron, and I afflicted the Egyptians by what I did there, and I brought you out. When I brought your people out of Egypt, you came to the sea, and the Egyptians pursued them with chariots and horsemen as far as the Red Sea. But they cried to the Lord for help, and he put darkness between you and the Egyptians. He brought the sea over them and covered them. You saw with your own eyes what I did to the Egyptians, and then you lived in the wilderness for a long time. I brought you to the land of the Amorites who lived east of the Jordan. They fought against you, but I gave them into your hands. I destroyed them from before you, and you took possession of their land. When Balak son of Zippor and the king of Moab prepared to fight against Israel, he sent for Balaam son of Beor to put a curse on you. But I would not listen to Balaam, so he blessed you again, and I delivered you out of his hand. And then you crossed the Jordan and came to Jericho. The citizens of Jericho fought against you, as did also the Amorites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hittites, Girgashites, Hivites, and Jebusites. But I gave them into your hands. I sent the hornet ahead of you, which drove them out before you. Also the 2 Amorite kings. You did not do it with your own sword and bow. So I gave you a land on which you did not toil, and cities you did not build. and you live in them and eat from vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. That's the history. That's the history lesson. And now the covenant. Fear the Lord, serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods your ancestors worshiped beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve. Whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you're now living. But as far as me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Look at that conviction. Again, Joshua spent the time to give them a history lesson of how God had blessed them and led them, kept them secure, provided for them, protected them, gave them land that was not theirs, gave them buildings that were not theirs, houses and fields. He renews the covenant, says we've got to get ourselves right with God, and then finally he gives them his own personal list of priorities. And it's as simple as this. As for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. And those words should be our words. That should be our conviction, every last one of us in this room today. It should be one that we live out in front of our children and even our children's children. That should be what we want in our hearts. I shared this message today too with a single purpose. I want this message to be one that will encourage parents to do their job and to get their kids plugged into the discipleship opportunities that we have here in this church. Now, if you know of others, get them plugged in there too. But don't forsake, on your list of priorities, don't forsake this for other worldly pursuits. If you can fit them both in and it'll work, that's fine. But the purpose of this message today, because it's all about the kids, the purpose of this message today is to get your kids into a discipleship opportunity. See, I'm a firm believer that we're really probably in attendance, we're only about 50% in kids' church from where we ought to be. So there may be people who are home today with their kids, and they need to be here. Miss Lucy is not doing childcare. They're learning. They're having fun, but they're learning. And Friday nights, I just surmise that even Friday nights, I'm thinking there's probably another 50% of our teens are doing something else. They're probably wasting time. They're probably up in the room at home doing something with their thumbs. And mom and dad don't care because they'd rather not have to drive them here and drop them off for 3 hours. But what's remarkable to me is those same parents will invest gasoline and time and take them over here and over there. And am I clear? Am I clear? I'm not trying to be judgmental, but I really believe that it's time for this generation to wake up for the sake of the next generation. Can you imagine someday you have gone on and you join your ancestors and you're in heaven, and over the millennia of time, your kids never show up. Now I know there's no tears in heaven. We read about that in the book of Revelation. There's no sorrow, there's no tears. But boy, if there could be, can you imagine you get there and they don't? Our number one job is to make sure we get there. We get there. And right alongside that task, we need to make sure that everybody we know gets there. Today it's all about the kids. But I'm talking about anybody and everybody. Folks, this church, I said it I think just last week or the week before, we're different. We really are. We're an anomaly. We're an aberration. I was going to say we're weird, but I wanted to. We're different. And we're different in that discipleship is our strength. We do it extremely well. And we have all kinds of opportunities here in this church for well, for everybody, but besides the Sunday morning service, but especially for the kids. We have life groups, kids church, junior kids church, Power and Line youth group. We have young adult meetings on a regular basis, boys and girls mentoring programs on Wednesday nights. We had vision electives on Sunday evenings for all ages, and just, through getting through the holidays, we'll have regular Sunday night services, but in January, we're going to do a mini vision. I'm not sure what that is, but that's what we're calling it, 4 weeks. Just a mini vision. And what I pray might never change is that we would keep discipleship number one. And then what I do pray might change is that more Christians would wake up to the urgency of being part of these ministry opportunities. We're not doing it to please the Assemblies of God headquarters. They don't even know what we're doing. But these small group meetings really help Christians to grow at any age. So get involved, make it a priority. Be intentional for yourself and for the sake of the next generation, so that Judges chapter 2 will never apply to our church. Now, next week, I'm going to share with you some specific strategies that Satan is using in our day. Because I want you to know something. He is strategizing. He has a scheme to pull the next generation away from Christ. It's active. I'm telling you what, it's high pressured. And we're experiencing it right now. You just may not notice it. And that's what I want to share with you beginning next week. He's extremely determined to steal the next generation. If you know Christ already, you know him already and you're here, he's not after you. He's after the one to come. He's after the next generation to come. He's after your kids. He's after your grandkids, maybe not even be born yet. And we need to make sure we deal with that.